Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt the new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. My guest today is former international cricketer Chris Lewis, a man who, having arrived from Guyana aged 10, won 80 caps for England as an all-rounder. Chris also achieved great success in the county game, playing for Surrey, Nottinghamshire and Leicester, where he was also captain. But put Chris Lewis's name into Google today and that amazing story of sporting success against the odds is buried under headlines of a very different type. Not long after Chris's cricketing career came to an end, he made what he describes as the worst decision of his life. Short of money, he gambled his reputation and his freedom when he chose to smuggle 3.5 kilos of liquid cocaine hidden in tins of fruit into the UK from St Lucia. He was caught, arrested, jailed, on remand and in May 2009 sentenced to 13 years in prison. Chris served 6.5 years, starting at Highdown Prison in Surrey. He ended the custodial element of that sentence at Hoseley Bay Open Prison in Suffolk. And that's where we last saw each other, almost 6 years ago. Since his release, Chris has worked hard to forge a positive path, not least with a book that's brutally honest about his mistakes and his time in prison, a story that has also inspired a play, The Long Walk Back. And he now works with the Professional Cricketers Association, advising young players on how to avoid the traps that he fell into so dramatically. Chris, it is great to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, mate. Nice to see you too. Both of us with a smile on our face this time.
Indeed, indeed. Obviously, we're here to talk about crisis, but let's start with that story that, as I say, is harder to find or read about now. Looking back, do you appreciate what an achievement it was to have arrived here as a 10-year-old boy and to have made it to the top of English cricket?
Certainly, most of my life, I think the answer to that would be no. Most of it, I think, I was caught up in just trying to get things done and perhaps not always appreciating where I'd got to be perfectly honest. I think with hindsight, like with so many things, I can look back now and I look back on a large part of that journey with so much pride as an immigrant coming to the country and setting my sights on doing the thing that I've always wanted to do and ultimately getting there and having a level of success. I think everybody in those circumstances should be. But I think at the time, I was so busy trying to achieve things and trying to achieve that it wasn't always, in fact, very rarely, did I actually take time out to actually appreciate that, to be honest.
Did it feel against the odds at the time? Or
No.
Were you sort of always full of confidence?
I wouldn't say I was full of confidence as such, but I was always filled with hope. It didn't really matter what was going on. Certainly as a young person, I always had my dreams and I always had that hope. I think that was something, I think I was fortunate that was instilled in me from Guyana. As a young boy, as you're growing up, the expectation was that certainly for your parents and your grandparents, the life they'd experienced was a hard one. So they got you ready and they said, this may be a hard journey and there'll be lots of knocks along the way. The real key is to stay positive, dust yourself off, and you'll get there. And I think certainly the first part of my life, I kind of used that quite seamlessly, and it carried me a tremendous way. In fact, all the way to my dreams.
You had the support and the help of some brilliant people, family and otherwise. But cricket is, is an incredibly tough game physically, but also mentally. It's no coincidence that there are a fair number of mental health issues within the game. How did you, from although it wasn't a crisis, it was a hell of a challenge to compete and to succeed, particularly at that stage, in the game. If you were to try and, when you look back now, when you try and sort of capture the sort of attitude you had, the approach you had, how would you summarize it? Because there's grit in there, right?
So you would call it that. I think you can call it many things, but how I experienced it going through that is that you have a dream and you try to hold on to it. I wasn't sure by any means. In fact, most of my career before actually becoming a professional, I wasn't necessarily meant to be the one who would succeed. There were a lot of people who were, at that time, more talented, but it was the thing that I wanted. And I remember going outside on Christmas Day, sweeping away the snow and playing cricket. Now, I didn't necessarily realize the importance of doing those things and that sort of commitment. In fact, I wouldn't even call it commitment at that time. But fortunately, that's what I had. I had a love for the game, and I would play pretty much anywhere, anytime. But also within that love for the game, it was a kind of a stand your ground attitude. I like that challenge, whether it's with the ball and you're trying to bowl fast and somebody is trying to hook you out the ground, or whether you've got the bat in your hand and you've got your floppy cap on and somebody is bowling really, really fast at you and you're scared. But how I'd learned the game is that you didn't show that fear. You gritted your teeth and you kind of get on with it.
Yeah.
And I think it was those things that stood me in good stead, because when I got to different levels of playing cricket, and I found that, let's say, my skill level was wanting, I went and practiced. I remember doing slip catching practice for the first time, and the ball hit me straight in my chest. It was quite embarrassing, and everybody was there watching, and they had done it before. But by the next week, I was in the slips.
So determination.
Yeah, but although I didn't see it as that, it was just a love of the game and wanting to do well, and not wanting to be the guy who dropped the catch or who couldn't feel. And all those things motivated me and pushed me forward. And it all ended up in a place where I eventually became good enough to achieve what I wanted to achieve. But certainly to start with, there wasn't any 100% confidence going, I'm going to do this, I'm the greatest cricketer in the world. It was more, I wish I can do this, I really want to do this. And on the back of that, there was that hope that you could. You weren't sure, but there was hope. And I'll be honest, that alone took me to the doors of Leicester. Ken Hicks saw me and he thought that I had ability. And within a short space of time, I had the tag of professional cricketer. In fact, as an 18-year-old.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. I remember,
which happens, a fair amount now. Didn't happen very often then, right?
I mean, I was in a little bubble. I must admit, having just come to the country, I wasn't really sure what happened in the country, and I think, to a large extent, I think that was a good thing. A little bit naive, you would say, and just kind of just headed for my dreams. Not that with the expectation that it was definitely going to work, but with just that hope that it could,
As a player, you were a terrifically exciting all-rounder, but enigmatic was the other word that was often used to describe you. What was that all about?
I don't know. I'll give you my take on that. I think over my career, there's been a lot of words used to describe me. I would say a lot of them not necessarily meant to be pleasant. As regards to enigmatic, the way I put my whole experience, certainly going out to play county cricket and playing county cricket, was really a clash of two cultures. I'd come from the Caribbean, and everything I knew from the Caribbean was right. That's how we did it. And then here I was in England, and it wasn't so right most of the time. And I must admit, through a large part of my career, that created a lot of problems for me, outwardly in people's perception, but also inwardly in perhaps how I started to perceive myself eventually. I think in a lot of parts, I would agree that people would have found my behavior and perhaps even my outlook very difficult to handle. As regards to timekeeping, that was just one of those things that was poor. It's going to be hard work for anybody to deal with you if you're not punctual. So that was something I think I got particularly wrong. What I would say is that there was never any malice in that. My issue was that I always tried to get everywhere on time rather than 10 minutes early.
Yeah.
So inevitably, I was late a lot of the times, and sometimes, let's just say, I was trying to fit too much into 24 hours.
Because some people would look at that and just assume that it was a sort of arrogance, right? That it was a kind of, listen, of course you're going to play me. I'm going to bowl up whenever I'm ready to bowl up, and you're going to play me because I'm that good. You're saying that absolutely wasn't. That wasn't what it was about.
No, that simply never occurred. This was somebody trying to organize himself in a lot of cases and organize himself badly, poorly.
Yeah.
Occasionally it meant that it was you went out and perhaps stayed out a little bit too late, had a couple of too many drinks. And in fact, probably the most famous lateness certainly involved that, where I went out at night, met some friends, had a late night, set an alarm, and then the next morning, the first thing I was aware was the sun coming through, and it was a little bit too warm. And I looked at the clock, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was supposed to be at a test match at 9. Now, of course, there's nobody else to blame but you for that. And eventually you throw your hands up and go, I got that wrong. But I would say that I was there. There wasn't any malice in that. And I would also suggest that at the time, that was perhaps more standard than we have now, where professionals are in all forms, you would say, very professional.
The timekeeping, the kind of late arrival that you just mentioned for the test, it ended your test career, right?
Yes, it did.
So on the one level, you can kind of look at a story like that and sort of chuckle about it. On another, it was the start of a chain of events that one might argue, and you'll tell me whether that's fair or unfair, but that started a chain of events that ended, pretty catastrophically, which obviously we'll get into in more detail. Before we get there, though, your county career, obviously, and your one-day career continued for a couple of years, I think I'm right in saying, but your county career continued for quite a while. But you felt presumably that your international career ended too early. Certainly, a lot of people in the cricketing world, a lot of cricketing writers felt that it was too early, that you were too talented not to be playing.
I would say 100%. On a personal level, I had just gone through a crisis beforehand where I'd got injured and seriously injured with a hip injury. And that meant that I couldn't play for a year.
Just when was that, Chris? Just so we
That
understand
was,
the
I
chronology.
think, 95. That was 95. Yeah. I was at Notts at the time. At the end of that year, I left Notts and I moved to the Oval. Started 96. Got that international space back within the team. And I felt at that time I was probably playing, certainly bowling, the fastest and the best that I'd done through my career. And that summer, I think it was India and Pakistan who came. India, I think I was man of the series during the one-day internationals. And then I think the final part of the summer, Pakistan was their second test or maybe even the third test at the Oval. And I'd had a good summer. I was looking forward to going. I think we were going on tour to the Caribbean that winter. I think I was aware that I'd already been selected. And then I turned up late that morning at the test match. And really everything changed from there. I remember bowling that morning and looking up at the screen, having already been told that I was in the one-day squad, and looking up at the screen while I was bowling. And of course, you automatically look for your name and realizing that your name wasn't there. And not the magnitude, but just the scope of what was about to happen started to, kind of hit. So I was sad, but it was, again, one of those situations where it was nobody else's fault. But certainly for me, I felt that at that time, it was the time where I felt I could perhaps push ahead in my international career. I wasn't a young man. Well, I was a young man, but I wasn't 22 anymore.
Yeah.
And I felt that experience and playing against perhaps younger people who had watched me play would also, I'd be able to use that to my advantage. So on a personal level, and it's something that I don't think that I've ever spoken about. It was sad. It was sad because I think following on from that, there were perhaps little bits where perhaps I could have been selected. The World Cup in England, and I know it dawned on me once I wasn't selected for the World Cup that it was over.
So that was over. Yeah.
Did
it feel like after that point? Then did it feel like a crisis in your head? Albeit it'd been a relatively slow moving one. There wasn't that single kind of explosive moment, I suppose, in your mind. But did it feel like a crisis?
Yes and no. What I would say is that I think throughout my career, I felt that I'd had mini crises throughout it, whether that was people writing in the papers that black players don't try when they're playing for England and those sort of things. Or generally just people just having an opinion of you that, well, it's that you're not a nice person. So I felt that these sort of things had happened consistently throughout my career. And at that point, although it was larger and it meant the end of my career, I actually thought it was one of those. I didn't necessarily appreciate at that point that this was perhaps the beginning of something a lot deeper and a lot and darker. To be honest, I'd always felt myself being that person who bounced back.
Yeah.
The optimistic. Here I am, but I'm not happy where I am. But it can get better.
And this is what I'm interested in, Chris, because thereafter, after the international career ends, you have quite a bit of success in the county game, but it is up and down. It is that kind of picture that you've just painted, I think, is sort of represented in the sort of facts of the story, if you like, that kind of come in the next 6-7 years. I watched though an interview of yours that you gave at the Oval in March 2008. Yeah, so that
Yeah.
journey you just described as is behind you, and you used the word bounce back a moment ago. You did bounce back, right? At the age of 40, I think I'm right in saying, you're standing at the Oval with a Surrey shirt on, and you're talking about your comeback, having been brought back to Surrey to play in their 2020 team.
Yeah.
A remarkable thing in and of itself, but also a remarkable opportunity, right? That speaks to some grit and determination through those years that we just discussed. You look well, composed, you're smiling, you're clearly fit. You look like a bloke who's completely together, right? And grateful for an opportunity that not many players of that age have. Now, 9 months later, Chris, 9 months, you're walking through the nothing to declare exit at Gatwick with a bag full of liquid cocaine hidden in fruit tins. What happened in your life that took you so quickly from the Oval into a prison 13 miles down the road?
Well, to be honest, to tell that story, I'd have to go back to before the Oval, and the reason for that is that I would say that once I finished playing cricket, that whole journey and that experience became very different. The years involved from stop playing, which I think was at 32, to coming back at the Oval, which was 40, I would describe as difficult and challenging for a lot of reasons. First and foremost is that once I left cricket, I'm almost sad to say I was a different person. I was somebody who was upset. I was somebody who was angry at the circumstances of me leaving cricket. I was living in a place where I thought that was unfair. And fast forward 8 years to the Oval, and what you see is somebody really, really happy that things were about to change in that moment. All those things you said, the opportunity, the joy of doing something that you love, even the feeling that there was a little bit of unfinished business, the excitement of playing 2020, which you'd never played before, which is so exciting. Being at the Oval itself, where I'd enjoyed 2 years of real happiness in my cricket career, they were all evident in that conversation at the Oval. But the truth, or a deeper truth behind that, is that I was coming off not particularly a great time. And I was hoping more that coming back to cricket would change all of that. So consequently, when after a couple of games, literally at the beginning of the season, that it was clear that wasn't going to happen. I'm injured. I'm not going to play again. All those things and more just seem to be on top.
You're told that, are you? Is there a moment when, having been injured, because as you say, you did suffer that injury so quickly into the comeback, you're told, are you? There's a moment when the doctor says to you, Chris, I'm sorry, mate, you're not gonna play again, or is it a self-realization? What? Tell me about that moment.
There wasn't a moment where the doctor said that. That injury is the original injury from 1995. Right. I know it. I've been managing it all that time. It always hurts. It was different. I knew.
You knew that was it. You knew that this time you won't be able to get through it.
It wasn't a question of not being able to go through it. It wasn't an injury that got better the next day. It wasn't a stiffness from just working. And the funny thing about that is that you go forward again to my release from jail, and I actually came out and I couldn't walk.
Really?
Because things had deteriorated so much. So that's something since then that I've always been working with. When I actually played cricket after 25,
Yeah.
It was more a question that hot baths and getting it warm for the activities next morning. But on this occasion, I fell hard, and it wasn't just stiffness. I couldn't put pressure on it, and I knew I wouldn't play any more cricket that summer. In fact, my thought was at that time that I wouldn't play cricket at all again.
Okay, so that's a difficult moment for you, and I know that there were other difficult moments, through that period as well, that lead to you being in pretty dire financial straits. The kind of that sort of rucksack of disappointment that you're carrying around through those years over your international career. But there'll be people listening to this, Chris, who will be saying, that's very unfortunate. May even have some sympathy for you, but they will also say you got a choice, haven't you? And you then make a choice that is that's catastrophic for you, but also for the people around you and the people that you care about. Why did you make that choice? When you now look back at that moment, because I assume, and we don't need to get into the detail of what led to it, but I am interested in, because there's a moment when you cross the point of no return, right? And I don't presumably that's as you're arriving at the airport. I don't know, but you're still that choice is still open to you. Then, why did you make the choice you made when you look back on it now?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say people can say that it is a choice, and they're 100% right. There are lots of people. In fact, I'm not sure that I know anyone in life who hasn't faced difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So difficult times is a part of life. And what I would say at my difficult time, I got it so wrong. And I wouldn't hold up any excuses for that at all. Because I have people in my circle, in my family, who have had difficult times and didn't resort to the sort of things of importing drugs. Let's be clear. So I make no excuse for that. That was wrong. And it was really, really, how can I put it, poor choosing on my behalf. But I suppose that's why we're here. Is to have that discussion. Is at that moment, why did you do that, and not what seems more obvious?
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Right, and what I would say about that, and 100%, is that I got myself into such a bad emotional state, and let's talk about money. And what I mean by that is that my relationship or my thoughts about money at that time, I didn't have any. And emotionally, for me, I felt bad for a number of reasons. Not just because of the effect it actually had in your life, because that's also a glaring sort of statement about you. Also, because 100%, I was one of the fortunate ones. I was somebody who played cricket for England, who travelled and had loads of opportunity to put myself in a decent financial position.
Well, cricketers aren't the highest paid sportsmen in the world.
No,
but yeah, I'm sure you were doing pretty well, right?
Yeah, we're not talking cricketers are paid millions in football money in those sorts of times. But compared to everybody else, you were doing well. I was the one who, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, went and partied and did.
The brutal question that someone would ask you, Chris, listening to this, I suspect some people would say, "You say you didn't have any money. Do you actually mean you didn't have enough money?"
No. I didn't have any money. I didn't have money for the bus.
Yeah.
And that isn't the end of it, because lots of people didn't have money for the bus. But what I did with it is actually interesting. And this is with hindsight. I took all of those things to heart. I kept all of those things to myself. But also, I didn't actually believe that I was that person who could actually go outside of cricket and make it happen all over again.
Right.
So there I was emotionally.
Derek Pringle, who was your roommate,
yeah,
a very talented cricketer. He said that you were, in your prime. He said that English cricket really hadn't had an all-round athlete like you, that you could do it all brilliantly. But he said that there was moments off the pitch where he could see that you had this kind of underlying uncertainty. Is that what you're talking about now, really? When you say that having gone through the journey that we've described, post England, post cricket, the comeback had failed. You just had an underlying uncertainty about your ability to kind of get out and make a new life for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's pretty accurate. The confidence that people saw outside of cricket and outside that circle, once I left that, wasn't there anymore. And that's not because it shouldn't have been. It was more the way that I interpreted my world. And I was going back to making that decision to import drugs. Mentally, I was just in a place where the only thing I wanted was just to get rid of that stress, that feeling of not having money. I didn't want to be a drug smuggler. I just wanted to find some way of having some money in the bank, just to have a bit of a break. And of course, lots of people are in that position. What I did was, of course, I could have gone and perhaps even signed on. Embarrassment, shame, and all those things stopped me from doing that. And I found myself listening to conversations that I'd never indulged before in my life. And
those conversations lead to the decision. Was there a kind of what have I done moment before you were caught?
It's funny, and we're talking honestly, and my fear was so acute that all I had my eyes on was that monetary relief. And in truth, there's a moment at the airport where I'm stopped. The officer stops me and goes, "Can I search your bags?" And while he goes behind to carry out whatever search or carry out whatever tests they do, I'm standing there. And I could honestly say that at that point, what's blatantly obvious all along to everyone becomes obvious to me for the first time.
Were you a risk taker? You are someone who, after all, is prepared to stand on a cricket pitch and face a ball from Curtly Ambrose. I mean, you're.
I see what you mean, but
were you a risk taker? I'm interested in whether you still are, by the way, a risk taker. But were you then a risk taker? How loud was that voice in your head?
I would say no, but most people would say yes.
The logic dictates that the answer to that question is yes.
No, logic in my head dictates that perhaps some people are a little bit more afraid. And on a different level, something can be facing Curtly Ambrose as an example. There wasn't a risk involved in that.
No.
Now, to somebody who doesn't play cricket and sees the ball flying that way, there's a massive risk involved. In fact, it's all risk.
Yeah.
Somebody's shooting bullets at you and you're standing there. That wasn't the way I experienced it at all.
But you were caught. You spent 6 months on remand preparing for your trial the following May. You said that you sort of did a deal with yourself that if you were found guilty, you considered killing yourself.
Yeah.
From a crisis point of view, that would have been, the limit for you, the breaking point. thankfully, you didn't. Tell me about that moment. Let's go back just a step. This is a moment that we've both shared, right? The sentencing moment, a genuine moment of crisis. Tell me how you felt at that moment.
Listen, I've relived that moment a number of times. I'm standing in the box, and the judge stands up, and he goes, 13 years. It was just too long. I don't mean too long time. I just meant in my head, it was a lifetime. 13 years was just it could have been 25 years. It could have been 100 years. It wouldn't have made any difference. It was just so long. I remember looking to my brother, my younger brother, to the left, and just going, take care of Mom. But yeah, at that moment, I would say I had nothing.
Your lawyers must have warned you about what sentence to expect. What did they? What expectations did you have?
The general thing is that I was told is that it would be for anywhere from 10 years to 15 years, and it came in at 13. But there was just a lot. I didn't think. I couldn't. My brain couldn't come up with how I was going to organize myself. 13 years just seemed so long, and so long in a place that I wasn't appreciating. I wasn't liking, and so forth. But it's interesting that a lot of the plans were made before I got sentenced. That if I got sentenced, then this is what I might do, and this and the other. But the reality was, once I actually got sentenced, I got back to the jail. I cried that night. I was sorry for myself. 13 years, pretty much my life was over as far as I saw it. But killing myself wasn't actually an option. When I found myself in that place of despair of 13 years, the idea of actually going to do it didn't appeal. It was still distant. I wasn't that person.
Yeah, this is a theme that's coming out in a lot of the conversations we're having, Chris. And we're all, a lot of these conversations are kind of heading to the same point.
Yeah.
From very, very different angles.
Yeah.
So no comparisons being drawn here, because you've been, very clear about this is self-inflicted. Yeah. But when you hit that point of crisis, whatever road has taken you there, what the common theme here is that's when you discover who you really are, right? That's the, if there's and I imagine at that moment, very hard to see any positives whatsoever, but if there is the positive, it's that you have total clarity about your situation, but also about yourself. Would you agree with that?
I think I agree that those moments can bring the best out of you. I think in my experience, let's be frank, is that at those moments you could go either way. At those moments in your life, sometimes you do lie down and play the victim, and then there are other times you go no. For me, I think this is where my experience in cricket and that confidence started to come back, where the attitude I used in cricket, I started to see how it applied to just beyond cricket. That level of confidence, that level of hope, even though you're looking at a situation that seems dark on every side because you're looking around and pretty much everything has turned to dust in your life.
Okay, Chris, let's talk about prison. a stark, but also in many ways a very emotional place. A building full of men whose lives have sort of, unraveled to one degree or another, all coping or trying to cope with it in a lot of very different ways. All of them wanting to sort of present a version of themselves, sometimes accurate, sometimes not. I'm sure was your experience. What was your prison identity, if I can put it that way?
I would like to think the sulky one. I remember going into prison and trying to decide, as you say, how I'm going to play this. Perhaps just coming up with the idea that I was going to be the bloke who didn't really say much and was not going to be too welcoming. And the reason for that is that I didn't want to have those conversations. I didn't want to be continuously sort of talking in jail. But I think what you set off to do in jail and how it actually ends up or what you portray can be very different things. Emotionally you feel away and you think you're holding up very well, but to somebody else's eyes, they can perhaps see that it isn't all that it is hard. And as you know, I'll defy anybody to say that jail is easy. I know a lot of people put on that bravado, but there's so much going on in jail. There is so much emotional pain that's being played out all around the place, But really, I just set out to really just get my time done, however long that took, and in whatever way I could actually get through.
I had a glimpse at something that you had a much longer, harder stare at, but time is strange in prison, isn't it? It sort of stretches and squeezes. Looking back, I can hardly remember most of it now, but at the time, the days, were they were bloody endless. How did you find that aspect? Because you had such a longer period of time to try and cope with.
Well, I think that's the crux of the matter, is that I think at my sentence, or pretty soon after, I worked out how many days I was going to have to spend in jail. And of course, that's not going to be helpful information. And it was endless. And I remember certainly in the first year, just having Groundhog Day all the time. And as you say, you've been in jail a year, but you can only remember 2 days.
Yeah.
With clarity, it's such a strange thing.
And to sort of walk through. I mean, you're surrounded by literal doors of negativity, right? How did you sort of find your way through to and what were the positive doors? I mean, I know that you got very fit. Your injury, obviously aside, but you're generally very fit. You did a lot of courses. You were a mentor. You kind of look for the positive. I mean, how important was that stuff?
It was the thing that made the difference. It was the thing that made the difference. Without the positive stuff, and when I say the positive stuff, I don't necessarily mean the courses or anything in particular. I mean how you process your stuff here. There's lots of stuff going on. Yeah, you're in jail. It's not one of those situations you can actually get away from. You can go and have a holiday, or can have an hour. I couldn't get away from it. So that in itself almost forced me to start thinking about my quality of thoughts.
You are, Chris, an example for those who want to make the argument that prison works. You were caught, you were punished, you accepted that punishment, and now you're a reformed, changed man who, presumably will do everything in his power never to go back there. But as you know, large numbers of young British men go to prison, come out and go back again. Recidivism rates are appalling. The number of children of prisoners who themselves end up in prison is another sort of heartbreaking feature of the British justice system. You met far more of these young men, these men who come in and out of prison than I did. But what's your view of where we are, on that front?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think perhaps just like you, I found it all really, really sad. It was so sad to see the number of young people, and from a personal point of view, the number of young people who I felt had very little hope, whether that was in the system or just life as a whole, and that's the thing that probably struck me more than anything else, because through my experience, whether that's from growing up and becoming a successful cricketer, losing that all, and then perhaps being in a place now again where you're optimistic, your state of mind is so important to how you feel emotionally, and I wouldn't want any human being anywhere to be without hope.
When we met at Hulsley Bay, you were on Rottle, release on temporary license, where you were able to leave prison during the day and work. You worked in a kitchen, I think. I know this, of course, because on one day, not long after I'd arrived, you came back to prison one evening and knocked on my door. You were there holding a Tupperware box that you handed to me with the words.
Sounds really bad. This.
I thought you could do with this. And I opened the box, and inside was the most delicious fried chicken I have ever eaten in my life. It certainly was after 3 months of prison food. So, first of all, a very belated thank you. But presumably, Chris, you were the recipient of similar, small acts of kindness during your time in prison.
I was. But listen, Andy, I'll be honest. I remember when I first went out on Rottle for the first time, and I smelled cakes and bread and all those things that I hadn't tasted naturally for years and years and years and years. And I remember what it felt like to taste something that tasted like food. And when I saw you, my heart went out to you, to be honest. And I wanted to share that experience, almost saying, you know what, it can get better. There is hope. And I knew you had all of those things anyway. But I just wanted to actually share that even within where we were, that we could still be people. We could still be human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was appreciated, metaphorically and actually. Were you able to play cricket in prison?
I came across one game of cricket, and I wasn't allowed to play. I had to be the umpire because apparently I was going to ruin the game. Right,
which you probably would have done, to be fair.
I thought it might have been hard. It might have been hard with
I
one
suspect
leg.
It wasn't of the highest standard, even with your injury.
But it's funny. I went to the gym quite a bit, but I didn't play. I didn't play much sports. Again, it's that same thing. A lot of things reminded me of a life or being in a place that was a lot better. And so being in jail, it was hard to face a lot of those things. One of those was music. Music, I think throughout my life, I've listened to music. All different types of music. So they brought back so many different memories, but they brought back memories of good times. So I found that in jail, when I listened to those songs, it brought back those memories, and it was painful.
Tell me about life after Hulsley Bay, because of course leaving prison is not the end of the crisis. In fact, for a lot of people, it can often be the start of another.
Very true. It's an interesting thing in the sense that I spent 6.5 years waiting for that day of release. I'm not saying you think about it every day, but you think about it a lot. And when that day came, the overriding emotion was just relief. And although I hadn't thought beyond it so much, what was very clear is that it was just a new beginning. That perhaps those tight shoes that I'd had on for a long time was coming off. But this was the time where another challenge started, how you piece it all back together.
And there are practical difficulties, right?
Yeah,
particularly with a sentence as long as yours, because it's often misunderstood that you're sentenced to 13 years, you serve 6.5. That's the 6.5. That's the end of it. Far from it, right?
No, there's so much going on potentially afterwards in that you're unlicensed. So there are restrictions, of course, imposed. So it's not like you're free to come and go as you want and travel as you want. But also the other thing is that, of course, people have prejudice or preconceived ideas about prisoner. If you're a prisoner or if you've been to jail, straight off the bat, you're a bad person. It's there, as you pointed out, that if you Google my name, that the first thing that comes up would pretty much be the drug offense. So you literally have to carry a lot of those things with you as you go forward.
How do you find that now, day to day?
That's a really good question. I'm okay. I think I'm better than okay, because I'm back in that place where I'm happy to kick down walls if I need to. And what I mean by that is that, of course, people are going to have their opinions and people will go no and yeah. But I've put that into a general thing. That's life. It was the case in cricket, but you still press on. Yeah. I'm at a stage now where, yes, there are difficulties, but it's not so much the difficulties that I try to actually focus on. I try to focus simply on where I'm headed.
One of those positives, of course, is your role with the Professional Cricketers Association, where you tour the country talking to young cricketers, telling your story in the hope that they don't, fall into the traps that you fell into so dramatically. That must be rewarding work.
Listen, the cricketers, the Professional Cricketers Association is something close to my heart, and certainly when I came out, and the idea of going and talking in front of all 18 counties, ex-professionals, wow, that was scary, emotionally scary, just having to stand in front of your peers and people you'd played with and up-and-coming players and try to explain how you'd had so much and got it so wrong. But I think it's an important part because I think it's a real thing in sport. It's a real thing in life. Yes, in the sense that we can all do well, and if we're not aware of everything that actually goes in to actually doing well, at other times we can make glaring mistakes. So in the end, it was an opportunity, and in the end, I was proud to be in front of them, going, "Listen, guys, we've got and always had such an opportunity here, but these are the things potentially to look out for."
Yeah.
As for you in the corner there on your mobile phone, yeah, uninterested, that was me 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
excellent. Did he put the phone away?
Well, he did. Of course, you know what I mean.
Chris, outstanding. Thanks so much for this conversation, which I think is full of value for anyone who's interested to look at crisis, through through a slightly different lens than perhaps we have in most of them all, but most of our other conversations. And thank you for being so honest. Thank you for being so frank. I'd like to finish though by asking you for your crisis cures. 3 things that you lean on in the dark days that are personal to you.
Well, bear in mind that we're going through a world crisis, you might say, with the pandemic, and people spending a lot of time in their house. I found it interesting at the beginning, just looking at it, wondering how people would cope with the isolation of not being able to go out and those sort of things.
Not our first rodeo, right?
Going into nature. Yeah. Whether it's the park or going down to the river, I'm taking walks. Reading has been a great help because it helps me to focus my mind sometimes on one particular topic. Sometimes there's a tendency that your mind can be everywhere.
What did you read in prison?
A Course in Miracles. It was a really, really long and almost a study book. But it was all about it was about taking control, that you were more of the center of what was going on in your world than you ever imagined. Yeah. And it was something that helped me to start to take responsibility for the stuff that was happening in my life, rather than putting that all out on other people.
Very good. Third?
Meditation. For exactly the same reason.
Every day?
I would like to think so. Sometimes I forget, and like a lot of things, it's the moments where I feel that dis-ease, that I tend to run back to it and go, okay, you need to quieten down and find that nice place again.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for talking to me today. It's fantastic to see you again, and fantastic to see you looking so well. And good luck with everything going forward.
Mate, 100%. Likewise. Nice to see you, mate.
Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to send us your feedback. You'll find our contact details and our show notes giving you the key insights from our guests at crisiswhatcrisis.com. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe. And if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. It really helps. Thanks again.